but fortunately it has a simple title, Fernando. With that win on May 14th, 1981, the left-hander improved to 8-0 with a minuscule 0.50 ERA, 68 strikeouts over 72 innings, while holding opponents to a 172 batting average. Writer Matthew Moreno on Fernando Valenzuela's first full season. He started on opening day when Jerry Royce had injured himself. Valenzuela had appeared in 10 games in 1980, and he'd been sharp, but he was still an unknown quantity. So instead of the tall, blond German-American, Royce is derived from the German word Russian. That's uncomfortable. Instead of Royce, Dodger Stadium got a starter who was not tall, not blonde, not German or Russian. He was from Sonora, the same state as Mexican President Alvaro Obregón, the happy man with one arm, his right, lost in battle in 1915. Luckily, Valenzuela is a lefty. I could not watch him by myself. I needed to share him. I began to watch his games over at Ricky and Jane Monroe's house in San Luis Obispo, both because they were such good company and because Ricky, a born color man, has a knack for wit, sometimes caustic, at the exact moment it's needed, not before and not after. Valenzuela's specialty was a screwball, a pitch that will eventually make some pitchers' elbows explode spontaneously while they're reaching across the dinner table for some mashed potatoes. We soon learned, too, that another Valenzuela specialty was hitting. He loved to hit. He won a Silver Slugger Award in 1981 to put over his fireplace, probably resting on brackets just above his 1981 Cy Young and 1981 Rookie of the Year awards. Oh, and his Major League Player of the Year award. In 1981, after we'd seen a Fernando screwball strike out an Astro or a Giant or a Cub swinging, as if his bat was a feather boa, Ricky and I might look at each other without saying a word. Sometimes, once the Miller beer commercial had begun, Ricky would shake his head in disbelief. It was euphoric watching that 20-year-old pitch. When Fernando Valenzuela came to the big leagues, Bob Lemon, then a Yankee scout, stared in disbelief. He leaned over and asked a Dodger scout, "How old is he?" 20 was the reply. Lemon thought about it for a moment. 20 what? He wanted to know. Los Angeles Times sports columnist Jim Murray. This is what is important, I think. Valenzuela may have been from Sonora, but Chavez Ravine was home. This was the barrio, demolished to make way for Dodger Stadium, where the Zoot Suit riots began in 1943. My kids and I learned about them every year when I taught U.S. history. It was important to me to teach them the dark side of the war, even as we learned about its heroes, from Torpedo Squadron 8 at Midway to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in Italy, to the third of the wartime industrial workforce that was made up of women. The Zoot Suit riots, along with the others that broke out across America and overseas that summer of 1943, represented a moment when we'd forgotten who we were and what we were fighting against. Racism was the sickness that typified the Imperial Japanese Army's officer corps and Hitler's SS. For several nights then, in June 1943, gangs of roving sailors and soldiers beat the living hell out of East LA kids, pachucos, whose sole offense seemed to be the elegance of their clothes. The fashion, zoot suits, was popular with black kids, too. The suits must have offended some servicemen in a time of wartime austerity, when suits for civilians lost their cuffs and wide lapels. Double-breasted suits were as rare as 1943 Ford sedans. There's no such thing as a 1943 Ford sedan because Ford was making B-24 bombers. It's possible, too, that the servicemen were a little envious of the Zoot's mastery of the jitterbug, honed in hot L.A. jazz clubs. And they were, after all, brown people, those kids, in those suits. Those kids danced with lovely girls who rode the streetcars out of the oppressiveness of the ravine and of their rigidly traditional Mexican parents to meet their dates downtown. They were jitterbug divines, those young couples on the dance floors inside noisy, smoky clubs. The dancing was interrupted in June 1943 because of a U.S. Navy auxiliary post on the fringes of the ravine. That's where the fighting began. Sailors wolf-whistling at Chicanas and shoving teen boys off the sidewalk were among the foreshocks. The riots soon took fire, spreading from Chavez Ravine to Boyle Heights and ending at what is today the 405. The LAPD watched passively as the GI gangs, sailors and soldiers from San Pedro, and scatterings of Marines up from Pendleton went after the Mexican-American kids with axe handles. The LAPD arrested the Mexican kids, but only after they'd been bloodied and stripped naked by swarms of malevolent Nebraskans who were defending their country. This is the history that colored the background of opening day 1981, when Valenzuela pitched a 5-hit shutout over the Houston Astros, then in the National League, in the days before they learned to bang on dugout garbage cans to tip their batters as to which pitch was coming next. Fernando humbled the Astros that day. That year, what Fernando did was to restore Chavez Ravine to its people. Dodger Stadium, as trivial as it may sound, began to serve churros. Now, you can get carne asada nachos in a Dodger helmet bowl. Tuesday night will be Mexican Heritage Night. And then there's the uniform they sometimes wear, Los Dodgers. Sometimes another left-handed Mexican pitcher wears that uniform, Julio Urias, who's from Culiacan, Sinaloa, about 5 hours south of, wouldn't you know it, Ciudad Obregón. So they retired number 34 this week. Fernando looked marvelous, lighter at 62 than he'd been when he was 20 or 20-something. It was a good day for Chavez Ravine, a good day for baseball. Most of all, it was a good day for L.A. This is what I began to think about after his number was retired this week. Fernando didn't really arrive on that opening day, 1981. Again, I think that he came home. The Angeleños, whose great-grandparents had jitterbugged in contests at Eddie LeBaron's Trocadero on Sunset, came home too. It doesn't matter that so many of them were gone by 1981. After that season, in the fall, on the Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos, their great-grandchildren spread blankets on the grass and unpacked hibachis and began to make carne asada or carnitas tacos. While the meat was grilling, they decorated the graves of the people they loved, whom they always will love, with white glass prayer candles that illuminate the image of Our Lady, and with flowers, lots of flowers, with helium-filled balloons, with saints' medals, and with ofrendas, little clay pots filled with corn or chiles or sweets, and maybe a bottle of Mexican Coca-Cola, the real deal, like World War II Coca-Cola. Then they sat down, those young people and their even younger children, and began to talk across generations to the tombstones. They told the jitterbuggers stories about Fernando Valenzuela after it got graveyard quiet, but only because it was time to eat.